Montana Territory, August 1876. They were building the gallows when the cowboy rode into town. Sun beat down on the dusty main street of Dry Creek, the heat sharp enough to sting. Folks gathered near the jailhouse, some whispering, some staring bold. Above them all, the noose swayed gently from the half-built wooden frame like it was waiting. Holly's Lane stood behind the bars, wrists cuffed, dirt on her cheek, pride in her spine. She did not cry, she did not beg, and she sure as hell did not look sorry. The sheriff spat into the dirt. "She stole from the bank," he said, loud enough for the crowd. "Walked in, lifted a strongbox, and was halfway to the hills before we caught her. That was $300 in silver." Someone in the crowd muttered, "She ain't right in the head." "She's a thief," said another. "A liar." "She's a mother," came a voice from behind the crowd, slow and calm, heads turned. The man who'd spoken sat astride a dust-covered bay mare, his hat low and shadowing sharp blue eyes. He swung down from the saddle, boots hitting the ground with weight and purpose. "Name's Jack Dempsey," he said, "and she only took what was hers." The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "You know her." "She's my business," Jack answered. "That strongbox she took, it was hers to begin with." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but Jack did not flinch. He stepped closer to the jailhouse, past the folks watching, past the unfinished gallows. Inside the cell, Holly's blinked hard. Her lips parted, and for the first time since they locked her up, her voice cracked just a bit. "Jack," he looked at her then, really looked. Her hair was tangled, her knuckles bruised, but she held his gaze like she still had a fight left in her. "It's been 5 years, Holly's. I know. You got thinner," he said, voice low. "You got taller." He almost smiled. Almost, the sheriff crossed his arms. "You saying this woman had a legal claim to that money?" Jack nodded. "That money was held in trust by the bank for her late father's land. They never released it, said she needed a husband to sign for it." "She does not have a husband," the sheriff said. "I know," Jack said. "That is the damn point." The sheriff looked between them, jaw working. "You got proof of this?" Jack stepped to his saddlebag, pulled out a folded and dirt-streaked sheaf of paper. "Land deed signed by Henry Lane, witnessed and notarized. The bank's been sitting on it since he died. Money was supposed to go to his daughter and her children." The crowd hushed. "Children?" someone asked. Holly's voice was steady now. "My boy and girl, Ben and Bess, they're 6 and 3. I left them with Martha Granger out by the river bend. I told her I'd be back in 2 days. It's been 4. The sheriff stared at the paper, then at Holly's. "She still broke the law. She did not steal," Jack said. "She reclaimed." "You think that'll hold up in court?" Jack looked at Holly's again. "If it does not, I will stand for her." Holly's blinked. "Why?" "Because I should have stood for you a long time ago." The sheriff sighed, rubbed his face. "I will hold her another night. Let the judge ride in tomorrow. But I swear to God, if that paper is not good enough," Jack nodded, "then you can hang us both." The sheriff did not answer. He just turned and walked away. The crowd lingered, unsure what to do now that the drama had cracked. Inside the cell, Holly stepped closer to the bars. "You really think you can fix this?" Jack came to meet her there, his hand wrapping around the iron between them. "I do not know. But I will not let them hang you." Holly stared at his hand. It was rough and calloused, the skin across his knuckles scarred, but he was warm, solid, real. "I thought you left," she said. "I did." "Then why are you here?" He hesitated. "Because I heard what happened. And I remembered what I left behind." She stared at him, her throat tight. "You cannot just ride back in and fix everything." "I am not trying to fix everything, just this." He paused. "And maybe the rest if you let me." Holly's looked away. The wind tugged at her hair through the window's iron slats. The cell felt smaller now, more closed in than before. But something in her chest had cracked open. She whispered, "I thought I hated you. I deserve that. But now you are here." "I am." She met his eyes. "Do not leave again." "I will not." They stood there in silence, fingers brushing through the bars, the world beyond them quiet for once. And for the first time in 4 days, Holly's Lane let herself believe she might live long enough to see her children again. Jack stayed there until the sun dipped behind the mountains, watching over her like he had 5 years too late. The judge arrived just past dawn, a stoop-shouldered man in a dust-covered coat, his hair gone to white and his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. He didn't ask for breakfast or a wash basin, just the papers and a quiet place to read them. Sheriff Boyd handed the deed over tight-lipped and watched the judge retreat into the back room of the jailhouse without a word. Jack stood outside with his arms crossed, his saddle blanket still damp from the river crossing he'd made the day before. He hadn't slept. Holly's had a little curled on the cot with her back to the wall and her hands folded under her cheek like she'd done when she was 17, back before her world tore in half. He leaned in through the bars now, watching her stir. "You always this early?" she asked, voice dry. "I figured you'd want word quick as it came." She sat up slow, brushing her sleeve across her face. "That judge going to see it our way. He's reading it like something sacred. That's a good sign." She looked past him, out the barred window toward the street. "If he says no, Sheriff won't wait till sundown." Jack nodded. "He won't have to." She held still a moment, then asked, "Did you ever go to Cheyenne like you planned?" "Made it as far as Rawlins. Rail crew was hiring." "Why'd you stop?" "Didn't sit right." She studied his face. "What did?" "Leaving." She didn't answer, just kept her eyes on his, like she was measuring something she hadn't decided on yet. A door creaked behind them. The judge stepped out, glasses perched low on his nose. "This deed's clean," he said. "Bank's at fault. Funds should have been disbursed 2 years back." The sheriff's mouth twitched. "So what now?" The judge folded the paper slow and precise. "Now you let her out." No one moved. Jack stepped back from the bars. "You heard him." Sheriff Boyd unlocked the cell with a clatter, the iron door scraping wide. Holly stood but didn't step through right away. She looked at Jack, then past him, to the gallows still standing unfinished down the road. When she finally crossed the threshold, it was with a stiff spine and a calm face. Outside, folks had gathered again, drawn by the wordless spread of news. Holly's didn't look at them. She walked straight to where Jack held the reins of his mare, her hands steady despite the heat. "Where's your horse?" she asked. "Didn't bring one for you. I thought I'd be riding out alone." She didn't speak to that, just looked east toward the river bend. "Martha won't keep them past tomorrow. She's got too many mouths already." "We'll go now," Jack said. They rode out without a goodbye, the town watching them like ghosts. Jack didn't look back once. The trail ran dry and hard, the dust rising behind them in lazy curls. Holly's didn't speak, not for the first few miles, not even when the sun climbed past its peak. Jack kept his eyes ahead, letting the silence stretch. She finally broke it. "You left me before my father was even in the ground." "I know. I had a letter for you, told you I was carrying. Martha sent it to Rawlins." "I never saw it." She nodded, not surprised. "I figured I would have come back." "Would you?" "Yes." She didn't answer, but her jaw eased a little. The river bend came into view late afternoon, the cottonwoods tall and silver leaved in the breeze. 2 children played in the shallows, a woman kneeling in the shade nearby with a wash basin. When she saw the riders, she stood. Martha was near 40 now, her braid gone grayer, her shoulders broader than Holly's remembered. The woman waved a dish towel and hollered, "You're late." Holly slid from the saddle and ran the last few steps barefoot. Ben reached her first, arms tight around her waist, Bess behind him, shy and blinking. Martha crossed her arms. "They've been asking for you since yesterday morning." "I know," Holly said, breath catching. "Thank you. I told them you'd come." "I always said you were too hard-headed to die." Jack stayed by the horses, watching. Ben turned toward him, squinting. "Who's that?" Holly's looked over her shoulder. "That's Jack." Bess clung to her skirt. "Is he staying with us?" Jack didn't move. He waited. Holly's didn't answer the girl. "Not yet." Martha gave her a look. "Well, I don't know," Holly said. Then, quieter maybe, Martha grinned. "That's more than I expected." That night, after the children slept under quilts in Martha's loft, Jack sat by the fire sharpening his knife. Holly's poured water from the kettle, her hands quiet. "You still good with your hands," he said. "I had to be." They sat a long while, the fire popping soft in the stone hearth. Jack didn't look over when he asked, "You want to come with me?" "Where to?" "Wherever you want." "I'll sign for the land if you need me to, or we can go find something new." She didn't answer right away. "I'm tired," she said finally, "but not done. Neither am I." The flames settled lower. She reached for her shawl, but before she rose, her hand found his on the bench between them. "Just for a moment. I'm not saying yes yet," she murmured. "I'm not asking for it yet." She stood and walked away, but she left the firewood stacked neat beside his boots, and he knew she'd meant to. By the end of the week, they had a wagon. It wasn't much weathered boards, a single axle frame, and canvas patched more times than it wasn't, but Martha's brother was heading west to Helena, and left it behind in trade for a mule and a jug of rye. Holly's took it without ceremony, hauling the oilskin strongbox onto the floorboards herself before Jack could offer a hand. They packed it slow. Blankets rolled tight, a cast iron skillet wrapped in a flour sack, dried beans, cornmeal, lye soap, and a tin box of sewing notions. The children folded their shirts and trousers with stiff precision, watching their mother for clues on how to feel about it all. Jack roped their few belongings in place and hitched the mare to the tongue. He'd traded for a second horse from a Swedish farmer who ran a small homestead near the cottonwood stand. The gelding was wide-chested and even-tempered, with a coat like rusted copper and a habit of nosing Jack's shoulder whenever he paused long enough. That evening, as the last light bled into the hills, Jack stood behind the wagon and ran his hand along the frame. "You think they'll take to it?" he asked. "They'll have to," Holly said. "There isn't another choice." Jack glanced toward the creek, where Bess was stacking flat stones and Ben crouched nearby, poking the mud with a stick. "You still want the land?" "I want a bed that's ours," she said. "A door that locks. I don't care what the ground looks like, long as it's ours to stand on." Jack nodded, then pulled a folded map from his coat pocket. He laid it across the wagon seat, smoothing the creases. "There's a parcel north of Gallatin," he said. "Unclaimed, far as I can tell. It's near good water. Elk run through it. They say the soil holds." She studied the lines and faded ink. "Too close to the rail. Not anymore. They laid new tracks south toward Bozeman." She tapped the edge of the page with her thumb. "And the nearest neighbor, half-day's ride." She folded the map again. "That'll do." They left before dawn 2 days later. Martha waved from the porch, her apron damp at the hem, her arms crossed tight. She didn't cry. Ben rode in the back with a sack of apples, and his father's old slingshot looped through his belt. Bess sat beside Holly's on the bench, hands folded in her lap, her eyes wide and quiet. The road was narrow, lined with scrub sage and the last of the summer wildflowers. Jack rode ahead, scanning the horizon, rifle slung across his back, hat low over his brow. They made camp that night near a dry riverbed, setting the stones for the fire carefully, stacking brush for kindling. Holly's boiled beans while the children gathered pine cones and argued over who'd seen the larger jackrabbit. When the sky darkened and the fire caught, Jack brought out his harmonica, soft and worn. He played a tune slow and low, the kind that didn't call attention to itself, but filled the space between them just the same. Holly sat across from him, knees drawn up, her coat draped over Bess where she slept curled against her shoulder. "You always carry that thing?" she asked. "Only when I don't want to talk." She gave him a long look. "You've hardly said a word since we left." Jack stopped playing, letting the last note trail off. "I'm trying to get it right this time. You don't owe me silence." "I don't know what I owe you," he said, "but I know what I want to give." She didn't look away. "What's that?" "Whatever you'll take." The firelight caught the edge of her cheek, the curve of her lips, the slope of her throat as she drew in a breath and let it go slow. "I don't need a man to rescue me," she said. I believe you, but I wouldn't mind one who stays. Jack didn't answer, just reached down and fed another branch to the fire. That night, after the embers burned low and the wind carried the scent of pine through the trees, Holly stepped out from under the wagon canvas and walked to where Jack sat with his back against a log, eyes half closed, rifle across his knees. She sat beside him without a word, her shoulder brushing his. After a while, she said, "Do you remember that winter at the trading post when we got snowed in?" He nodded. "You made bread from acorn flour and said it was the worst thing you'd ever tasted." It was. It wasn't. She leaned her head back and studied the stars. "I still remember the way you looked at me that night." Jack turned toward her, his voice rough. "I still do." She didn't move, didn't speak, but she reached for his hand, fingers threading through his, warm and sure. He held on, quiet and steady, and didn't let go. By the second week on the trail, the land began to rise slow at first, then with more insistence as the prairie gave way to foothills, green and gold under the late summer sun. The wagon strained against the incline, and the horses sweated through their harnesses. Jack walked beside them, one hand on the bridle, his shirt clinging damp to his back. Holly's rode ahead that morning, Bess beside her, perched sideways in the saddle. Ben had taken to walking, stick in hand, carving lines in the dirt, and talking quiet to himself about wolves and mountain lions, and how he'd fend them off if they came. They passed no one for days. Just a trapper's cairn beside a dry spring and a line of fence posts long since fallen. The road narrowed to a track, rutted deep with old cart wheels and half reclaimed by grass. Midday, they crested a ridge and saw it a wide basin rimmed by pine and aspen, a creek threading silver through the center. A pair of deer lifted their heads and watched them without alarm before bounding into the trees. Jack let the horses stop. "This is it." Holly slid from her saddle, boots crunching in the dry grass. She walked forward slow until the wind shifted her hair and the scent of wild mint rose around her. Ben came up beside her. "Can we build a fort?" She glanced back at Jack. "We'll need a cabin first." He nodded. "I'll take an axe to those aspens tomorrow. We'll start small, one room. Enough to get through the cold." She didn't say anything right away, just knelt and pressed her hand to the earth. That night, they camped beside the creek. Holly's boiled water in the kettle and added dried rose hips from a bush she'd found near the bank. The children lay in the grass, counting the stars. Jack sat a little ways off, mending a harness strap with slow, practiced stitches. After a while, Holly's brought him the tin cup of tea. He took it. "You think it'll hold us?" "The land," he nodded. "It hasn't turned us away." He sipped, then said, "You ever think about what you'd have done if I hadn't come back?" She sat beside him, legs folded beneath her skirt. "I would have died a little slower, I expect." He looked at her then, the firelight reflected in his eyes. "You would have fought." "I did." They didn't speak for a long time. Then Jack said, "My mother used to say some folks are born with a lantern in them. She said you could see it sometimes when they were quiet, like the dark couldn't settle all the way." Holly's turned her head, brow furrowed. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because when they locked you up, you still had it, even behind bars, even with the rope being built right outside." She stared at him, the tea cooling in her hands. "You've changed. So have you." "I had to. I wanted to." She didn't look away when she said, "You could have had a different life, one without all this weight on it." "I wouldn't trade for a thing." Ben called from the wagon, asking for his bedroll. Holly stood, brushing the grass from her skirt. As she turned to go, Jack said, "I meant what I said, about signing the land with you." She paused. "You're not a man who makes offers twice." "I'm not." She looked over her shoulder. "Then I'll say yes once." He didn't move, didn't answer. Just watched her go, his hand still wrapped around the cup she'd handed him. In the morning, they walked the edge of the creek, marking out where the cabin would go. Holly's held the twine while Jack drove stakes. The children chased frogs through the reeds, their laughter echoing back from the hills. They started building that same afternoon, Jack with the axe, Holly stripping bark with a drawknife. The sun burned hot, but the breeze stayed cool, and the air smelled of pine and wet stone. At dusk, Jack set his tools aside and wiped his brow with the back of his arm. Holly stood nearby, hands on her hips, surveying the stacked logs. "We'll need a chimney," she said. "I'll teach Ben to lay stone. He'll like that." Jack stepped closer, his voice lower now. "You think you can be happy here?" She looked out over the basin, where the deer had returned and the sky had turned the color of ash and peach. "I already am," she said. He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't hesitate. Their fingers laced together without urgency, like they'd been made to fit that way all along. And when they went to sleep that night, it was in the open air, with the stars above them and the land beneath, and no gallows anywhere in sight. By mid-September, the cabin stood with 4 walls and a roof. The logs had been notched tight, the chinking packed with clay and straw. Smoke curled from the stone chimney Jack and Ben built together, and a door rough-hewn and hung on handmade hinges now stood between them and the mountain wind. Inside, the single room held a table, 2 benches, 4 pegs for coats, and a narrow bed built into the wall. Holly slept there with Bess curled beside her, while Jack and Ben took the floor on thick quilts. A bearskin rug lay across the threshold, traded from a furrier passing south, and Holly's had strung bundles of dried yarrow and rabbit tobacco from the rafters. That morning, she stood outside with a length of muslin and a needle, shaping a curtain for the cabin's one window. Jack sat on the stoop, whittling a spoon from pine, his hat tipped back and his hair damp from the creek. The children had gone to check the snares Jack set before dawn. "You always this still when there's nothing to do?" she asked. He turned the spoon, testing the curve of it with his thumb. "It's not nothing. This'll stir stew come winter," she smiled without showing her teeth. "You could have gone back to town weeks ago, found work. I have work. You know what I mean." Jack set the knife down. "I didn't want to leave." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she folded the fabric carefully across her lap, then met his eyes. "You think there's a way to make this last? I don't plan to leave again." "That's not what I asked." Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I think we make it last by choosing it every day, even when it's hard." Especially then. Wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine sap and damp earth. Holly's looked toward the creek, then back at the cabin. "You ever think about marrying?" "I did once," he said. "What stopped you?" "I left." She nodded, then said, "And now?" "I'm here." The children came back, Ben holding a rabbit by the hind legs, Bess with her hands full of wild onions. They were flushed and grinning, their voices bright as they recounted every step of their find. Holly's listened and praised their care, then sent them to wash up while she built a fire. Jack helped her clean the rabbit, holding the basin steady while she peeled back the skin. Her hands were sure, the blade slicing clean along the belly. "You want to marry me, Jack?" He blinked once. "I do." "Well," she said, rinsing her fingers in the basin, "we don't need a preacher to make it real, just a promise." "I can make that." She dried her hands and looked at him. "Say it then." "I promise to stand beside you, raise your children like they're mine, and build a life you don't have to carry alone." Holly's tucked a damp strand of hair behind her ear. "And I promise to let you." They didn't kiss, not then. The fire was lit, and the meat had to cook, and Bess was already asking if she could stir the pot. But the way Holly's brushed past him, her hand grazing his waist, was enough. That night they ate together at the table Jack built, the children with full mouths and flushed cheeks. Bess sat on Holly's lap while Ben recited every bird he'd spotted that day from memory. Jack listened, his hand resting lightly on the table beside Holly's. After the children were asleep, Jack stepped outside. The sky was clear, stars scattered thick above the pines. Holly's joined him, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She leaned into his side. "You miss the trail." "No, you miss the quiet." He looked down at her. "This is quiet." They stood that way for a while, her head against his shoulder, his hand resting on her back. "You think they'll remember this?" she asked. "They'll remember you brought them home." She looked up. "And what about you?" "I'll remember that you let me stay." She took his hand and they went inside together. Years passed and the cabin grew. Jack added a second room when Bess turned 7, and a proper porch with a bench and a rain barrel. Hollies tended a garden out back, and they kept hens and 2 goats. Ben built a trap line that ran nearly to the ridge, and Bess learned to sew from her mother's old scraps. They never wrote to Dry Creek. There was nothing left for them there. Each winter, Jack carved something new for the hearth: a bear, an elk, a pine tree, and each spring, Hollies hung another row of dried herbs from the rafters. They never spoke of the gallows again. And every night, when the lantern burned low and the children were asleep, Hollies would press her palm to Jack's chest and say, "Still here." And he'd wrap his arms around her and answer, "Always."